Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's August 4th, 2018, and this is another episode of Ask Me Anything. Recently, I posted another Ask Me Anything video covering my decision to grow grapevines, and I've been growing thornless semi-erect blackberries on trellises, and how I prefer the trellis system over to the pergola system for the growing those as well. And I talked about in that video about the growing the hardy kiwi that we've been growing here on a pergola. I failed to mention that I've also grown them up against a couple of other trees, and I put them up against locust trees because of the nitrogen fixing as a permaculturist. These are things that I thought would be that may work out. They haven't worked out very well so far, the ones on the trees, because the kiwis grow pretty rapidly and they need to reach out and grab onto something else. It's just the nature of such a vining species. So that isn't something that I'll be doing any further. Mimicking, the 7 layers of the food forest that traditionally described. Ann Studley wrote, so how would you grow the kiwi berries if not on a pergola? I just planted a couple and set up a T-bar trellis system with galvanized steel posts and 9-gauge wires. That actually sounds very nice, Ann. I think that system's going to work out great. What I have been imagining, based on YouTube searches and seeing what other people are doing and the cooperative extension sites, what they described. Now, I've modified it in my own mind to be beefier and shorter distance between the T-bars, if you will. But what I've thought about doing is using 6x6 rot-resistant lumber, whether it's pressure-treated posts or Lorraine or locust or cedar, whatever the material is, whatever I can get economically. That's what I was thinking about doing. And I know that the literature states that you can put these T-bar posts about 15 to 20 feet apart, and that'll support the structure. But my thoughts were sinking basically 10 or 12 foot posts into the ground about 4 feet deep, and having them extend above the ground just about 6'6", and putting and half lapping a notch in the top of it so that it could take a complementary and opposing cross member that would half lap notch in it, so that the sides of the post and the cross member all come together, and using galvanized bolts to secure them, using 3 bolts and galvanized or coated screws as well. That's how is some of the structures I've been building over the years. So our home is post and beam, so the bolts and the notched beams works very, very well. And with the outside structure, because of the moisture and heat that we have here, there's a shrinkage and things become a little bit loose. So by using screws as well, everything stays locked in very, very tight. So even though there's expansion and contraction with the weather changes, those cross sections have been extremely sturdy. They really don't give very much at all. What I would do is also drill 4 to 5, possibly 6 lines, depending on how wide this is. So probably I'd be using 6-foot wide cross member at the top, and putting either 4 or 6, probably 9-gauge or 10-gauge galvanized or stainless cables to go through those holes. And in those holes, I'd be putting the one-way anchors. I think they're called wire anchors, wire ties, not wire ties, wire locks. I'll put a link in the description below to a site if I can find these. So these get driven into the holes that you drill through the cross member, and then you just take the your wire or cable and feed it through, and as long as you're just going in the one direction, if you planned it correctly, it's almost like a Chinese finger trap. The wire can go through the through that anchor in one direction. So hopefully you planned it out well, and if you go to a certain point, it locks so that the weight on the line will not allow that to be pulled back through in the opposite direction, loosening that wire or cable. So that's what I'm thinking about doing, and putting very strong anchors on the outside of the two end support brackets, those T-bar supports. So I'd be putting anchor posts in the ground as well. We have very hard ground here, but I really don't like going back and repairing something later on if I can really get these structures in and secured. We have high winds, we have the ice storms, the snowstorms, and they do take their toll on everything outside, and so therefore I just want to have things really beefy and do it one time. The kiwi, I'm very impressed with how large, how rapidly the kiwi vines grow. And again, I have not pruned these kiwis appropriately. So what I would try and do is have both the male and female near each other, or on the same line potentially. But I think it's much easier if you have a system like you're using and what I've just described, to allow the pollinators to get to the flowers, to make easy access for pruning, so you can have, you know, basically your main trunk coming up and your two primary cordons going in opposite directions, going down the length of the support system itself. And then off of those cordons, each year you can take the second year growth and prune that back and allow your growth from that season to only extend out 16 or 18 inches, so that you've got good airflow, you've got adequate sun depending on the cultivar that you're growing, because you may want to have some in shade as well. And those are my thoughts anyways. I'm also probably going to put some sort of potential irrigation system in, unless I go down another 1.5 feet in the ground, dig out all the surface area, put in lots of cardboard, lots of wood chips, with on top of and below compost, and then mulching it up very high and hoping as that stuff breaks down, it will have tremendous water retention over time. That's one of the things that I found here, as well as we're in a significant drought right now, and those areas that are heavily mulched on the sides don't need to be watered up in the second food forest. They've done extremely well with all the wood chips that are there. So those are my thoughts on how I would not just support the hardy kiwis, but how I'm thinking about modifying our systems in the future. Anne has another question. So are you saying that carbon sources are prebiotics, and does that include shredded newspaper and other paper? The short and quick answer is yes, if we're using that analogy. So it is analogous. So all of those carbon sources that you mentioned, whether it's shredded paper, newspaper, cardboard, packages that come that are predominantly carbon sources, wood shavings, sawdust, all of those are wonderful carbon sources for fungi to break down, and the subsequent microscopic nematodes and microscopic arthropods to feed on and create a soil food web that will be more fungally dominated soil. I use the the terms prebiotic, when we talk about medicine, prebiotics and probiotics. The probiotics are the living microorganisms. Often people think of solely bacteria that live within our digestive system that can break down those food substances, basically fiber sources, and they're in beans, they're in our greens, they're in Jerusalem artichokes, they're in a plethora of different foods. Even the skin of a grape has fiber in it, and phytonutrients that are not released if we don't that are not released to the body unless we have the microorganisms in our colon to break down that fiber into short chain fatty acids, and those phytonutrients become bioavailable and translocate into our circulatory system, and we can reap the benefits of having that relationship between those microorganisms within our colon and the fiber containing and attached phytonutrients that are bound to those fiber sources. And some of those, I should mention this as well, many of the nutrients that are manufactured by those consumers of those fibers are also absorbed into the system. So it isn't just being released, they're actually creating some of these micronutrients as a result of the microorganisms that live within our colon. These foods that are prebiotics pass through our upper GI tract, down our oral cavity, our esophagus, our stomach, our small intestine, and once it gets into our large intestine, everything else has been absorbed because they're relatively simplistic things that are readily absorbable. When we're talking about those other carbon sources, we're talking about your simple sugars and all, and they're absorbed through the small intestine. Those ones that we used to say are non-digestible fibers go into the large intestine, and those beneficial microorganisms do their work and either liberate the attached phytonutrients that are there, or they manufacture new micronutrients that are absorbed, and many of these nutrients are anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinogenic, and the whole variety of things that happen. And I use that analogy because that's part of my prior profession. But when we lay down these rich, now getting back to the basics of this without using probiotics and prebiotics, when we have the shredded paper, all of these rich carbon sources, whether it's chunks of wood, brown leaves that have fallen off the tree, they're predominantly carbon at that point, straw, hay, dried out desiccated hay, wood chips, wood shavings, all of those components have a tremendous amount of potential for setting off this cascade of this soil food web that gets initiated by the various fungal microorganisms. So the fungi start to attach and start to break down the carbon. There are simple sugars that are being secreted by the plants in the area that also feed the fungi. Then the fungi consuming nematodes start to increase in numbers. Then the microarthropods also start to increase in numbers, and these are all microscopic, light microscopy ways that we can look at these. Then we're building this whole integrated soil food web that where there's exchanges and there's mutualism, a mutualistic symbiotic relationship within the soil, that you had been feeding what I called prebiotics, all these carbon sources, to the probiotic, again, these are analogies, to the fungi and other microorganisms that work with or consume the fungi as the process goes. And this whole thing started from, we start the whole process of succession so that we can foster, create an environment in our soil that decreases the weed load, increases, depending on which species of plants that you're growing, increases the health and well-being of these various other plant species. Like I had mentioned previously in one of the videos about the grapevines. This year it's been hot and humid, and we've had a problem with a fungal infection that I consider to be an opportunistic infection, and whenever I see disease processes come up, I don't whip out and try to say, oh, what bug should I use to get rid of it, or what other complementary plant, or what pesticide should I use, what sort of practices should I be doing that are often described by the educational systems, the cooperative extensions and all. I try to look at it and say, all right, what's going on in the soil food web? What am I missing? What am I not doing well? How am I not contributing to the environment? The other thing that I'd mentioned in that video, which I think is also important, it's amazing how quickly the appropriate microorganisms will populate an area without even trying to inoculate it, like using compost tea. And I think compost tea is an absolutely wonderful thing to be using. I'm not poo-pooing that. But I think that sometimes people are potentially thinking that the compost tea is the treatment, and it's like using probiotics without having the prebiotics. And I know this is getting very long-winded, my explanation, but I think that we need to always be thinking about making a complete circuit. The soil food web is a, just like the any ecosystem, it can be contained by itself. Yes, there are extensions out into other ecosystems, but it's regenerative, it's restorative. It has all of the capacity, all of the components, all of the workers there that take the waste from one system and utilize it as a resource for another system. I didn't explain that as well as I would like to have explained it, but yes, I'm sorry, and you're right with your interpretation of what I was saying. I just wanted to make sure that I wanted to re-explain that I'm using an analogy when I talk about prebiotics and probiotics, being very similar to having the carbon sources there and then inoculating those carbon sources with whatever sources. And previously I posted a video talking about how I'm put wood chips into the forest floor and letting that self-inoculate and using that as an inoculum around the various parts of the property. So now I don't have to worry about disturbing all of these areas. Like I've got ramps growing in part of the food forest. I've got other things that we've started in our forests, and this is our maple forest down and back, which is heavily shaded, a mature forest. So I've created in there a deposited area of wood chips that has been self-inoculated naturally by the forest floor, and that's where I'll be taking samples from and inoculating areas like where the grapevines are going as well. I just have to do some more work there first before I put down all the food sources, but it's amazing. It only takes a small amount of the appropriate microorganisms if they've got the food and they've got the shelter, if they've got the environment they need. So if they've got these fungal organisms have been living in the shade, so we want to make sure that there's some shade, so we have a nice mulch cover over the surface of it. They need to have their food sources, which is the wood chips. They need to have the moisture, but not get wet feet. They need to have air circulation, which is in the mulch as well. So we just need to make sure that we're trying our best to meet all of the needs as we've observed in the forest that we're taking the materials from. So without going any further, I hope that this has been somewhat helpful. If it has been, please give us a thumbs up. Share it with your friends. Hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when we post more videos. And by all means, please ask questions and leave comments. They really help me to think about what it is that I'm saying and make sure that I'm sharing with you my experiences and my thoughts and beliefs. Thanks so much for watching, folks, and have a great day. Bye-bye now.